The Federal Treasurer warns of tough times ahead. ANZ bids for Suncorp but needs to get through regulatory barriers. And how Thor, that's the movie, is turning into one of the biggest films of the year. It's Tuesday the 19th of July 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Have you seen Thor?
No, I haven't. And I was actually very intrigued to see that this is a headline story for us today because a lot of people have seen it and a lot of people have been talking about it.
Yeah, I was amazed by how big a box office hit that film's been. I must say, I'm not a moviegoer, so I've seen...
Sorry, the judgment came through there, didn't it? Sorry about that.
No, only occasionally. We saw the Elvis movie the other day, which was good. But most of the top 10 films of the year I haven't seen, I've got to say.
Oh, no, most of the movies, if we get to the movies now, it is typically to see something that is animated and it is at about a 10 a.m. screening now. So our lives have changed a little bit from the days when we would go once a week to see basically anything that was on. But so I'm very much looking forward to this because unlike you, I am a bit of a movie-going kind of person. So I'm looking forward to that story coming up a little bit later on. Speaking of later on, Sean, you've got a chat today with Chris Vian, who is the Chief Executive of the Australian Computer Society. He's a fascinating person, Chris.
He sure is. He's an American, actually, who has worked for 3 presidential administrations in his time. He's now in Australia really pushing the cause of the industry and the need to upskill people, get more people involved, particularly women, in technology. It's a fascinating chat.
Yeah, it's coming up a little bit later on, but the main story this morning, Sean, Treasurer Jim Chalmers yesterday said high and rising inflation, slowing growth and worries about food and energy security thanks to Russia's invasion of Ukraine has made the world a difficult, if not dangerous place right now.
Yes, sounds like he's preparing the electorate for the resumption of Parliament next week and a very tough budget in October, one in which the halving of the fuel excise will be reversed. He made that clear yesterday. That means petrol will cost 22 cents a litre more from September. Mr. Chalmers said rising interest rates made the government's massive debt more expensive and he plans to find additional savings in the budget. And the Treasurer also said he was keen to get going on a review of the Reserve Bank of Australia, which will involve a panel of independent experts reviewing the central bank's performance. He was very downbeat on the economy, I've got to say.
Sean, it seems like we have had a lot of positive news coming out of the new government so far, but it seems like that has mostly been foreign affairs related.
That's right. The honeymoon will soon be over for the Albanese government as the electorate turns its mind to the economy. And Mr. Chalmers isn't painting a rosy picture, warning that the budget later in the year will be tough. This government needs to manage rising interest rates. It needs to manage tumbling consumer sentiment. It needs to somehow get in control a ballooning government debt. And of course, it needs to push its legislation through Parliament. And that pretty much means satiating the Greens in the upper house, particularly around climate change legislation.
I know we've talked about how busy the Prime Minister has been, Sean, travelling around all over the world, but I reckon the Treasurer almost has a tougher job in the current climate.
Yeah, no glory. The Treasurer is always sort of the numbers person. And ever since Paul Keating, really, the Treasurer has had a very high profile, but they don't quite get the glory that the Prime Minister gets. I agree.
No, plenty of detail and plenty of challenges. So we'll be watching very, very closely to see what they come up with. And the Treasurer also warned yesterday, Sean, that the current wave of COVID-19 may not actually spike until the end of August, early September, around there.
Yes, yet another factor for the government to manage. The peak will be a bit later than expected. Also yesterday on the same topic, Michael, 2 state premiers, Daniel Andrews from Victoria and Dominic Perrottet from New South Wales, joined with the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese saying reducing quarantine times wasn't appropriate in the middle of winter, but they all sort of left open the door for that to happen. The comments came as a cruise ship carrying more than 100 passengers infected with COVID-19 docked in Sydney. That's less than a week after a Carnival cruise ship with more than 130 positive cases spent the day at Circular Quay. There were nearly 40,000 new COVID cases recorded across the country yesterday and 27 deaths. There are currently nearly 5,000 people in hospital and 154 are being treated in intensive care. A very clear reminder that that crisis isn't over yet.
And just before we leave politics, Sean, the National Disability Insurance Agency chair, Dennis Napthine, has resigned.
Yes, that's right. He was just 6 months into a 3-year term, so it certainly came as a surprise. He said the change of government meant it was probably time for someone else to take the role. The NDIA's CEO, of course, stepped down only last month, so that sort of leaves that particular agency with a leadership problem.
Yeah, sure does. Right, big day yesterday in politics. How did the local market perform?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up more than 1% to 6,687 points following the strong lead from Wall Street over the weekend. The past couple of sessions, Friday and yesterday, have pretty much made up all the losses of earlier in July. There were some really big moves yesterday. The iron ore miners did well. BHP and Rio Tinto closed up 2%, while Fortescue Metals was 3% higher. Macquarie Group jumped 3.1%, while National Australia Bank led the major banks, rising 1.6%. The energy companies, Woodside and Santos, both did well. South32 and James Hardie both finished up about 2%, and WiseTech Global rose another 6% after its big jump on Friday. Of the top 200, Michael, Tyro Payments did best on the day, up 10%. Fund manager Pendal regained the lost ground of last week, jumping nearly 9%, while tracking group Life 360 and lithium company Liontown Resources both rose more than 7%. Appen was the worst performer, down 3.5%.
And what about international markets?
Well, oil markets are stable. I like saying that. Brent crude is trading around $100 a barrel. Gold has come off its 11-month lows, but only just. So that's a little above $1,700 an ounce. And the Aussie dollar is trading at just under 68 US cents. For some good news for cryptocurrency holders, cryptos have bounced just a bit, and Bitcoin is back above $21,000 a unit.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, ANZ wants to buy Suncorp's banking business for $4.9 billion and has pledged to keep all branches open for a minimum of 3 years and keep headquarters based in Brisbane.
Yes, we talked about the deal yesterday morning, and before trading began, ANZ formally announced its offer. It now has to convince shareholders, the Federal Treasurer, the Queensland Government, and the competition watchdog, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, of the merits of the deal. Suncorp's share price jumped nearly 6% yesterday, while ANZ was in a share trading halt. Competition has always been a difficult hurdle in the financial services sector for any big deal. While the ACCC will take a close look, analysts believe the emergence of new players in the sector, from tech giants like Apple through to neobanks, online lenders and buy now, pay later operators, have substantially increased competition, making an ANZ Suncorp tie-up more likely. ANZ will ask shareholders for $3.5 billion to fund the deal, and yesterday said it had entered discussions to buy accounting software group MYOB. A deal will add about 1.2 million new customers to the Melbourne-based bank, and the Suncorp brand will remain for the next 5 years. What's it mean? Well, importantly, the deal adds size to ANZ, including $47 billion in home loans, $45 billion in deposits, and $11 billion in commercial loans. What it means, a combined ANZ and Suncorp will become the third largest household lending and household deposit bank, leapfrogging National Australia Bank, but still well behind Commonwealth Bank and Westpac. It kind of puts ANZ back in the game.
It certainly does. Now, Sean, I am asking you something completely without notice here, so let's see how we go. I'm just intrigued by the fact that ANZ last week, we were talking about the talks to buy the accounting software group MYOB, and you mentioned just then that they've ended those discussions now. The fact that both of these conversations were clearly going on at the same time, and then we talked about the fact that the ANZ Suncorp discussions were continuing over the weekend. It seems unusual, is it, to have one party involved in two big deals at the same time and both kind of coming to a head at the same time? Is that strange?
It's a great question because it's really unusual. This time last week, we were talking about ANZ and MYOB and how ANZ were talking about changing tack on strategy, getting into that small and medium-sized business market. Suddenly on the weekend, in fact, the first report was in the Financial Review on Friday afternoon, and it continued on over the weekend. The boards of the different groups met over the weekend. So it came together really, really quickly. I don't know what was behind all that, but it is certainly unusual for one organisation to have two really big takeovers on the go at once. Now, obviously, yesterday they dropped the MYOB one, so they're more interested in Suncorp. But it would be great to know exactly what went on.
Yeah, it certainly makes it a pretty exciting time for a podcast like Fear and Greed, doesn't it?
That's right. Absolutely.
And just staying in the M&A space, actually, Sean, EML Payments has confirmed that two companies have been talking to it about a potential buyout.
Yes, the EML said that last month it held discussions with two different parties, though talks have fallen through since then. Clearly, buyers are sniffing around, and EML's share price jumped nearly 6% yesterday. Remember, this is the payment systems company which ran foul of regulators through an Irish subsidiary that it bought. Last week, its long-term CEO stepped down. Its share price is off around 70% this year. Maybe there are some people out there that see value in the business, particularly when it has fallen so hard.
Sean, how about this one? A new report by the highly respected Grattan Institute says that more than 1 in 5 well-paid, prestigious or powerful federal government appointments are going to people with direct political connections.
Yes, and many jobs have gone to allies of the former coalition government over the past 9 years. That's a period, of course, that they held office. The report shows that for positions classified as well-paid, 22% went to political players, reflecting a jump in captain's picks in recent times. National institutions, including the Australian War Memorial, the National Library of Australia, and to Old Parliament House, were highlighted in the report. It also shows that 40% of the War Memorial board members have links to the coalition. In the case of Australia Post, half the board members have links to the coalition. Now, Michael, this doesn't mean they're not worthy recipients of it, but it just doesn't really pass the pub test.
Yeah, and Sean, you mentioned the War Memorial. There, obviously, Dr. Brendan Nelson was a former Liberal MP, leader of the Liberal Party at one point, and he then went on to become the director of the War Memorial and is now sitting on the board of the War Memorial. But there is no one that would be able to question his credentials for that job, and he did a spectacular job of managing that facility as well. So, yeah, I suppose it is a very interesting report.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to be careful, I suppose, with some of the numbers in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, few companies, Sean, have had as significant a turnaround in the past couple of years as Whitehaven Coal. Yesterday, its share price hit a record high, up 5%.
A couple of years ago, it was loaded down with debt in a totally unwanted industry. Then an energy crisis hits and Russia invades Ukraine, and Whitehaven and other coal companies, suddenly they're the toast of the town. The New South Wales-based company yesterday said earnings would be higher due to surging coal prices, which remain close to record levels. Now, the company expects to report pre-tax earnings of $3 billion for the last financial year. Now, that compares to $200 million the previous year. Incredible. Its share price is up 180% over the past 12 months and is one of the best performers of the top 200 over that period. The company now has a market capitalisation of $5.7 billion, which puts it alongside household names like Seven and Domino's. There you go.
Wow. Now, Woolworths has bought retail digital media company Shopper Media Group for $150 million cash.
Yes, Woolworths' retail media business Cartology will buy all the equity in the digital out-of-home media company. Shopper Media offers targeted shopper advertising through a network of more than 2,000 screens in more than 400 shopping centres across the country.
Lynas Rare Earths, Sean, has managed to report a big jump in cash despite output volumes tumbling.
Neat trick, really. Of course, it's all about soaring rare earth prices. Rare earths are used in electronics and, while not very rare, are difficult to extract and process. The 26% fall in production volumes in the June quarter reflected a lack of regular and constant supply of water to Lynas's processing plant in Malaysia. As a result, Lynas will change the way it treats rare earths in that country. Now, Lynas is the only major producer of separated rare earths outside China, and the slump in its production, ironically, is likely to boost the average price it receives. Lynas' share price was up 0.5% yesterday, but over the past 2.5 years is nearly 700% higher.
That's pretty incredible, isn't it?
Sure is.
Now, Newey's share price fell 14% to a record low, Sean, after it warned that slowing sales to new customers and mounting legal costs would weigh on its full-year earnings.
The software company's shares have fallen 70% this year and are down 90% since listing in December 2020, when its initial public offer was the biggest of the year, one of the least successful IPOs in recent times.
All right, moving on to overseas news, and New Zealand's inflation rate hit 7.3% for the June quarter. That's the highest in 23 years.
Yes, it was above analysts' expectations and followed a similar increase in the March quarter. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand has been aggressively lifting interest rates since October last year, and the cash rate is currently 2.5%. compared to Australia's 1.35%. The salient lesson for Australia here is that it takes quite a few rate rises to control inflation.
This is a really tragic story, this one, Sean. A report into the mass shooting at a school in Texas says egregiously poor decision-making resulted in more than 1 hour of chaos before a gunman took 21 lives.
About 400 law enforcement officials rushed to the Texas elementary school on May 24, but took too much time to do anything, the report says. The nearly 800-page investigative report into the shooting criticised state, federal and local authorities. The gunman fired about 142 rounds inside the building, and about two-thirds were shot before any officer even entered. Hard to believe.
Yeah, it sure is. It's just terrible. All right, a bit of a change of pace now to finish on, Sean, and we mentioned this one at the top of the show. Thor, Love and Thunder, which is the movie starring Australia's own Chris Hemsworth, topped the US box office for the second week and is turning into one of the biggest hits of the year.
Okay, I get this isn't exactly hard-hitting business news, Michael.
Not exactly, but...
But... you know, cinema's a big business, entertainment's big business, and it's interesting. Thor was number one over the weekend. Children's film Minions, Rise of Gru is number two.
I've seen that one. Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
And new release, Where the Crawdads Sing, was number three. I haven't seen that one, but cracking book, I've got to say. What's amazing, though, is that Top Gun Maverick was number 4. That film in the US has taken $618 million in 8 weeks. Now, globally, it's reaped $1.2 billion. That's the biggest of the year. Number 2 for the year is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which is a superhero film. I had to look that up, Michael. And 3 is Jurassic World Dominion. Now, they've both taken more than $900 million worldwide. But Thor is at number 5, having earned $771 million, and it's still top of the box office. So it's still climbing.
Well, the thing I like most about this is, and I mentioned this before, is just that anyone who is doubting whether cinema would be viable post-COVID is definitely kind of being proven wrong. And as someone who loves movies compared to you as someone who doesn't like having fun, it actually means a lot to hear a story like this.
Good. I'm pleased you're happy.
Yeah, excellent. Now, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. And today, Sean, you're speaking with Chris Vian, the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Computer Society.
Yeah, that's right. As we mentioned at the top of the show, we talk about the need for skills in Australia and particularly, you know, the push to get greater diversity, not just, women being the primary part of that, but just generally greater diversity in the sector. Very interesting chap, Chris.
I just love the fact that he's worked in 3 White Houses, from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama. You can't get much more varied than that, can you?
Yeah, no, you can't.
It's a really good chat. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 19th of July, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.